Mrs. Kelly, how do you think this dress suits me? Sarah said, spinning in front of the mirror in a new evening dress and adjusting the ruffles. Elderly neighbor put on glasses, slowly rose from the chair and approached the girl. Barbarian, and not too definitely. Sarah laughed and hugged Mrs. Kelly. Woman is about to turn 80, she still sees debauchery and defiance in everything. Dear my, but what are you? She same clothes, yes, and what should I show I? And since the ironing board is flat, and in vain at school they tease the table, book, solid corners and boards. Old lady laughed hoarsely, once again carefully examined the dress of a young girl. But are you going to the evening, where there will be all the military? They in the boards can see the woman of dreams, and then they won't leave. I something knowing they're scoundrels, they are still walkers. Sarah laughed merrily. Mrs. Kelly, tell us about your soldiers. Yours time, maybe be, they were different. Now all men are cowards, that the military, that doctors, that detectives. Come up to a woman and be the first to meet, this is a feat for them. Elderly the neighbor returned her chair and raised her eyebrows in surprise. Really, what can prevent a man from making a step to a woman, which he likes? Cowardice. But it's already my Jeremy at one time tore with his teeth all the obstacles on the way to me. Sarah sat on the arm of the chair, in which Mrs. Kelly sat, and hugged a neighbor. Why did he then compose you? Yes, with a baby, this long bad story, shrugged off Mrs. Kelly. I touched the fabric, with which the dress was sewn. Barbarian, what air! How it's herself today, not that evening, in which to remember. About sad. Get ready, late for the event. Sarah jumped up from her chair and plunged into the middle of the room. Well, let it go, let them wait and worry, that I won't come. She laughed so hard that Mrs. Kelly began to giggle behind her. She clapped for anyone with a beautiful young girl. After all, once she herself was so easy, unencumbered and full of hopes and illusions. How time passed quickly. The barbarian kissed her neighbor and ran away to her. I have been looking for a dress in a department store for a long time, but did not dare to buy it. That cost a lot of money, but the premium to the news saved the day, and Sarah, turning a blind eye to the amount, took the plunge and bought it. Before this she went to the store 1.5, tried it on and thought about it, how perfect she looks on her not perfect figure. But then decided to buy. Dreams should come true, at least these are not too global. Sarah worked in the military garrison as a nurse, and dozens of men passed through her small paramedic station every day, beautiful, single, and interested. But for some reason, the girl did not pursue male attention at all. As if she did not need a husband or family. She grew up in the company of a grandmother. Mother died early, severe illness, father disappeared from their lives even earlier, trying to find happiness in a new family. The quarry left a grandmother. She loved me, and I looked after her and absorbed every word of a wise woman, who worked all her life as a military cartographer, and we were very educated, smart, intelligent women. Once upon a time fate threw her with her military husband to the town of Roger, in which only those who were involved in military service, and after the death of her husband, remained in the town with her little daughter and son. Son left town, because he was not interested in a military career, and there were too few women in the city to build a personal life. Left for another city. He successfully married and lived in a family for many years separately. Accident left a grandmother, who, although often remembered by her son, honestly admitted that, which is closer Varenki, I don't have anyone. When the son with his children and wife came to Roger, she still showed all her attention and care only in relation to her eldest granddaughter, dearly loved and devoted. This offended her son, so he came less and less, and then did find a permanent reason, for which he could not visit his mother. Grandmother died. When we are cooking it was 20 years, and for a girl, this loss was the greatest for all I have had in such a short life. Mother died, when its reigning was still a child. She did not realize all the severity of emptiness, longing for another person, gone forever. Then there was a grandmother. That enveloped Sarah warmth and care, smoothing out all the difficulties associated with the loss of a mother. Now barbarians left alone, not used to living on her own, I loved to listen to my grandmother, stories, advice, and wisdom. So Sarah met a housemate, Mrs. Kelly, alone and in need of help. No one Mrs. Kelly didn't have, except for the son, who left the capital a long time ago, lived and worked there. The family just could not be recreated. And this thought made the old mother very sad. So, and who has not seen grandchildren in his lifetime, although age allowed already to have great-grandchildren, the barbarian remembered son. Mrs. Kelly once even had a crush on him, despite what Germany was older than the girl by 15 years. Now he was already 45. About Sarah herself 30. Time squeezed both, but for some reason none of them wanted to start a family. Mrs. Kelly kinda wondered Sarah with an old neighbor, to whom, after the death of her grandmother, she turned all her attention, all your love and care. Why did you name your son Germanus, such a strange name associated with Germany? You what? The old woman waved her hands, then completely crossed. No, Germany translated from Latin means real, native. Not the name of the son is associated with the name of the country, but only with my desire to put a special meaning in the name of my son. He because I have one. Now it took us a long time to have a child. Older daughter died at 2 months old. I thought that I would never be able to give birth and raise a baby, and here God sent me a boy on such a nimble frame. At mention of the deceased husband, Mrs. Kelly always brightened in the face and blurred in a smile. It is seen that she loved her husband very much, despite that he left her with her son in her arms. For incomprehensible yet barbarian reasons. The girl didn't really understand, how could a father leave his wife with such a long-awaited child? But Mrs. Kelly for some reason always justified such an act of her husband, calling their family life a sad story. Sarah was first seen from Germany, when she was 10. Certainly she saw him too, but didn't realize what this boy neighbor's son was. When I was only 3 years old, when Germany already left to study in the capital, leaving my mother, and then did and sat there, trying to build a family, but he failed to find happiness in his personal life. He didn't have a child, and he rarely visited his mother. But these rare visits were a real holiday. Then, at the age of 10, Sarah, seeing for the first time a 25-year-old young and handsome guy, she understood that only he can. In the second half she dreamed not hard, experienced, when he visited his mother with another wife, jealous and did not even come to visit a neighbor, who then already actively communicated with grandmother Sarah. Ken had to say, what Mrs. Kelly and the girl's grandmother were close friends. That's why Sarah sometimes saw my grandmother in the face of a neighbor, who left many years ago, but remained an example for her in everything. Now the same barbarians, obedient to grandma, explored her advice, switched to Mrs. Kelly, no less wise and so kind for Sarah. Mrs. Kelly became a new grandmother. And her soul was always filled with memories of a relative, when Sarah came to visit a neighbor. And she came every day, brought food, cooked, cleaned up, and did about. More Sarah be sure to ask about Herman, who rarely called, did not write letters, and came 1 year, yes, but not always. Capital's life completely sucked my German, sighed Mrs. Kelly. He is now different. Earlier he was very close to me, shared news, thoughts and reasoning, and took advice. Now what use is I to him? Old wreckage, from which there are more problems than positive. Not to say cook condemned put out her hand, does not understand, does she do it in defense or is she offended, that this man can treat his mother in this way? How she thought. He loves you. Just men treat feelings and relationships differently than we women. That's why girls get closer to their mothers, and boys to their wives. So if he had a wife, the neighbor said, yes, there is no one, long ago I would have married for real. Then one wife is 10 years older, too barren, walking 3 does she rush about at all, wishing only to obtain a residence permit. From these words barbarians were both sad and happy at the same time. That fact, that Germany never stayed with any of his wives, gave the girl hope that someday she can take his heart, any place. But on the other hand, such an unsettled son made his mother very upset, and disorders have never benefited the health of the elderly. Sarah remembers that day, when Germany came to mother alone. By that time he had separated from his third wife, had a hard time, took a vacation and stayed with his mother for 2 weeks. Sarah continued to visit Mrs. Kelly, spent evenings at her house, and they began to really communicate with Herman, although before that they only exchanged pairs of neighborly neutral words. "Stop me to roll out," strictly told her Germany in one of the days, when they stood together in the kitchen in the house of Mrs. Kelly, Sarah washing dishes. She was wiping and taking from the girl's hands. "I feel like an old man, when you turn to me." Sarah blushed, because she wanted to look in the eyes Germana only bringing joy and positivity, but it turned out like this, that he thinks of himself as an old man in her eyes. "I don't think so at all, Germany. I always treated you, that is to you, warmly." The kitchen was dark, and Sarah rejoiced, what he does not see, how she trembles and blushes at the thought of him being nearby. "I always treated you well," the man responded. "You good, thank you for that. Why are you helping your mother, supporting her?" "I will always do this, so don't worry about us," Cook answered, coughing slightly, because the excitement took her breath away. "I will love her, like a native grandmother of the water series." "Do you have anyone?" unexpectedly asked German, and the girl almost dropped the plate from her hands. "No," Sarah stammered, who by that time had never been close to anyone at all. To her it was already 23, but I never had a relationship with a man, because she remembered from her grandmother that the intimacy of a man should occur only for love. Accident loved all her life only Herman. Germany took her by the hand, putting another plate out of them. He put wet hands cooked to your lips, and the girl's heart fluttered her chest with happiness and sweet excitement. "I will accompany you today," asked about him. "I understood that tonight he will stay with her." He left after a few days, leaving Sarah only bright and warm memories. Germany promised nothing, did not swear in love, didn't invite her along. He just became her first man, whom Cook loved even more. After these few nights together, Mrs. Kelly wondered about their relationship, but she didn't say anything. One time, immediately after the departure of the son, she looked closely at the accident and shook her head. "Not committed summer mistake, my girl, he because he doesn't know how to love." Sarah then just smiled. "I can love the two of us, my feelings are so strong." After this conversation, they never returned to the topic of relationships as a neighbor Cook and German. After this, Germany still came several times and always stayed for several nights at Vari, who never refused him. The man had a feeling that she was only waiting for him, and there was no one in her bed. After his last departure was something like this. Bear never brought men to her home. She started light novels, met young people for health, but she didn't let anyone close to her heart, closing the door on him, the key to which remained with one single man. Sarah was a real star at New Year's Eve. She discussed the wives of officers, whispered behind her back, and envied her youth and beauty. At one dance she was not left alone, always had a cavalier, ready to ask her to dance, and there were a huge number of those who wanted to. Sarah didn't care about hearing, nor the words of military men, which, taking this opportunity to, whispered in her ear various suggestions and allusions. Cook laughed out loud, because all these actions of a man were for her a reason for fun, not more. The next day she learned from Mrs. Kelly about what's on New Year. The son of Barbara will arrive, ready to jump from happiness to the ceiling. Here there were 3 links in the woman's next phrase, will arrive with a new wife. Earth as if opened under the feet of Sarah. Her arrival, Germana, was a cause of great hope for her. She took him in, waiting for some words from him, but the man silently remained in place. How happened a few years ago, he promises nothing, she doesn't ask for anything. This an unspoken rule was established between them, never violated. Maybe then I'll go to visit my friend. Sarah talking to a neighbor, voices that have become joyless in an instant, not I will interfere with your family happiness. Mrs. Kelly the same furiously shook his head, not think it over. You like my own daughter, more precisely granddaughter. You won't go anywhere, stay with us. I spit on another madam. And capitals. Germany and really came with his wife. She turned out to be young, almost younger than Sarah herself, a girl with blonde hair and the same blonde, almost transparent eyes. She was pleasantly polite, and Germany never took his eyes off her. Caesar nervous. Mrs. Kelly felt that an awkward pause hung in the house at the festive table. A woman Germana Cute didn't know anything. She talked a lot about her work as a teacher at school, some problems, education, but no one really listened, though out of courtesy Sarah chaffed every time, when Milo asked, "You see or represent?" Sarah had no idea what should be imagined or understood. She just nodded like a robot, from which they took out human organs and put batteries. After Germana's departure, she was sad, sadly. In the evenings she disappeared from a neighbor, they are needlewomen together but never returned to the subject Germana and his wife. Then, closer to spring, Germany suddenly arrived alone and without warning. He was upset about something sad, and on the very first night he ended up with Sarah. She gladly accepted it, didn't ask too many questions, and was just happy about it, that the beloved was with her again. For the snow was already melting by the window. It was warm in the spring and cooks in the heart too, as if hiding everything. After a long frost. "I love you," she said, hugs Germana and, whispering words in his ear, "It looks like it's spicy, not say these words." But why? Sarah was genuinely surprised. For what is silent and such feelings, because what is fiction and fantasy, like our relationship? Just temporary fairy tale, in which I fall. Coming to public. That is, you come here, to open your storybook. Not quite simply. Nowhere it is not so magical and fabulously easy. You don't ask questions, don't talk about feelings. This is just a perfect relationship, who in the real world cannot survive a day. These words sobered Sarah, who is still hoping for their joint future. Turns out, there will be no future, because the fairy tale always ends. Ordinary people don't live in fairy tales, but only in real life. She no longer waited for German, and when he came to her the night before leaving, the girl didn't let him in. What not so German was surprised. Fairy tale ended. "Germany, I'm no longer the heroine of your fantasies, let it be different, I'm a real woman. I am a real live person with feelings and emotions. If you don't want to admit it, you better not come." German, well. In 3 weeks Cook found out about what is expected of him, and did not hide it. Only from Mrs. Kelly. "What the same," said neighbor Varenko, "my girl, Germany will not change, you understand, he is with me again. Cute, they reconciled, and the happiness of family life drags my son into the pool with his head. Now he needs, tell the child, he won't know. Just make a decision for yourself, can you raise your son alone? Once upon a time I made this decision myself." "You?" Cook looked at her neighbor in disbelief. "My darling, I told you what I had. Sad history awaits Herman. I knew that I couldn't raise him. Broken. This was my sin, my mistake. But if I hadn't given birth, I wouldn't have kids now, no hope, not grandchildren. I don't understand." Sarah knelt next to a neighbor, took her dry hands in mine. "Germany was not the son of Jeremy." Mrs. Kelly shook her head. "No, I could not give birth to Jeremy. I realized it too late, because my first daughter was born before I married him. Having lived with her beloved husband for more than 10 years, I understood that I cannot give birth to him. I understood that I could have children, but he didn't understand what the problem was. I gave birth to Germana, another German, but immediately put maybe in front of the truth. Now I wanted to live a lie, and when I found out that I'm expecting a child from another man, I was scared. Before I had a choice, or tell the truth and destroy the marriage, or not to give birth to this child and save the marriage. If you chose the first," concluded Sarah. "In the novel, what certainly he was proud, despite loving me. This was his only flaw, too much pride, because of which he subsequently died alone, unable to come to terms with my betrayal of its consequences. Mrs. Kelly, you didn't think that German, it's still a son Jeremy, but there are miracles." The old lady smiled and stroked Sarah on the head. "Well, native miracles don't happen. Novel then was absent for more than 2 months, and I met others, on purpose, to get pregnant, taking advantage of her husband's absence. Germany, son of a completely different person, who never knew about it, that he has a child. Yes, he died a long time ago. Yes, he was married with children. Not risking, and trying to give birth from a childless man. Here is such a sad story. I will give birth, let it go, Germany knows nothing. Maybe, this time he will have a real family. I will destroy it with me, anyway, he only has an unrealizable fairy tale. 6 months later, when Cook already walked with a big belly, Mrs. Kelly handed the girls 2 envelopes. What is this? Sarah was surprised, accepting envelopes from the hands of a neighbor. In one donation is necessary, and in another letter to German, which you will give him after my death. Sarah horrified, which donative, which death to shut up and listen to. Neighbor was strict, almost harsh, you carry my grandson, and I just have to be a good grandmother for him. Not even I know the will, I will see and hold him before his birth in the arms of a son. My human, cowardly, petty. I will give you my home. Now I am writing a will, because I think that you will wait for my death. House now you and your child after my death you can sell, you can burn it, and send a letter. Germana not like him. I promise, what will you do as I said? Larry nodded, swallowing the rolling tears. Approximately not her own grandmother spoke in the same voice before her death, when myself accident didn't even think about it, that the old woman will soon be gone. In December Cook gave birth to a son, whom Mrs. Kelly I managed to see her and hold her in my arms, and in a month, at the end of January, and did not. She just fell asleep and didn't wake up again. Talking, called right away Germana and told him the news. Still said that his mother left him letters. Germany was a frustrating task, bury her myself. I can't come now, I have an important event at work and cutely have a hard time with pregnancy. Sarah hung up. Think about, how disgusted is Herman. How long has she been wrong? You are loved by such an indifferent person. Even own mother acknowledged the fact that her son was petty and cowardly. So, and it turned out. Germany arrived 6 months later. He entered the mother's house in the old-fashioned way, which had been buried in the cemetery for 6 months, but saw Sarah with a baby in her arms. He was so surprised that for a moment was speechless. Shaking head, he came closer. Young woman looked at him accusingly, holding out an envelope with a letter from mother. I came to arrange an inheritance, explained German. To land this house is mine, dryly answered accident, rocking the restless son. Germany looked at the child, without even saying or asking. You joking mother couldn't do this to me. He smiled wryly, took the letters. You could do that, without not coming to the funeral, as if she was not in your life. Sarah spoke in condemning tones, without any shame or doubt. This is my private affair with my mother. You no one here at all, snapped German, sharply opening the envelope. Having run eyes line by line, written in the small handwriting of Mrs. Kelly, he chuckled. It's clear now, why did the house leave you? You allegedly did not give birth to a son. Sarah looked defiantly at Herman. This is my own business, and none of your business. Deceived my mother, to make a house. Thoughtful such, cunning, correct Sarah, but in fact, the pike is toothy. Out of hatred, she looked into the face of the once beloved man. You are used to living with such and marrying such, and we don't have things like that. Take away the things you need, where is the door, you? No. Sarah left the house of Mrs. Kelly, who now considered her on full rights and grounds. To her it was embarrassing and disgusting, but see Germana didn't want to at all. He knocked only think, in the evening, when it was dark outside, Cook put my son to bed. Germany entered her house with a guilty face. Sorry if I offended you, but I really don't believe that this child is mine. Cook shrugged indifferently. Work's your. I won't convince you of anything. Nam doesn't need anything from you. My wife lost a child. I am not sure if it was waiting for him at all. We divorced less than a month ago. Sarah nodded, as if taking into account the words of Herman, but didn't respond to them. It's time, Germs. Leave, he looked at Sarah with hope. Really, the story is really over, young woman chuckled. This for you, everything was and remains a fairy tale. I live in real life. Door to the house Cook opened, and a young man entered with a large bag. Seeing Germana, he looked at him in surprise. Son, Mrs. Kelly came for things, explained the man. Germany, and this is my husband Nicholas. Germany is already leaving. Germany stared blankly at the young man, who stood next to Sarah. Really, the story is really over. He couldn't believe it, that woman, who has been waiting for him for so many years, now just kicked him out. I had to leave Germany. For a long time he stood on the porch and thought about what his mother wrote in the letter. You together with Sarah lost the only chance for true strong love. You're just a fool. I was hoping that you will be smart. Germany silently nodded to himself. Yes, he is a fool, who for so many years never learned to appreciate his only real woman, which, loving, waited. Now everything is broken and there is no hope for a miracle, because fairy tales do not exist in real life.